Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Hell or High Water. I think a lot of crime dramas talk about the desperation of crime and the desperation of your economic situation and the desperateness of living in a small town and having very little options. And Hell or High Water captures a kind of criminal desperation and erased American small town, probably more than I've seen any movie do it thus far. It's definitely probably one of the most telling crime drama in a post-economic collapse America. And if a post-economic collapse America has any meaning, especially if you're in a small town where all the businesses have been shuttered and there's really not a reason for that small town to exist anymore, but it's still your home. Sad because you know it's kind of true. It might be being a little extreme, but it's really showing a side of America where you're sitting there wondering if anyone had any other choice but to survive. And it almost feels like it's on the brink of society collapsing and crumbling even more, like there's really nowhere to go but down. And it has this kind of not a classic Hollywood noir sense to it, like that kind of being put upon yourself to do a crime, but then almost like a film that's very influenced by those noirs, like a 70s film, but it's like this film is more influenced, I think, by the 70s film than the noir, but is in fact, I guess, by default influenced by the noir. And it has that sense of like kind of a B movie that lives on a lot longer than anyone thought it would, and it's really excellent at being a very effective crime movie. And Hell or High Water is that kind of thing and all those things, but also modest and low-key and a slow burn, but also can be exciting and thrilling and has an amazing setting in West Texas that it fully uses throughout the film. It's a beautifully kind of small, modest crime movie that you didn't really think Hollywood would make anymore, and if they did, they wouldn't be this effective. It felt so modest, I was kind of surprised it got released in theaters, frankly. And although it's not incredibly visually striking, in some places it can be very beautiful, in other places it feels like a very good small mid-budget movie where everyone was just kind of getting the job done, but they ended up caring somehow while making it. It kind of works in the way a well-oiled machine works, but ends up being able to say something about how depressing the situation is for these guys and the situation for everyone around them and how they can't nearly escape in it. It's not like that song where she's talking about if he has a fast car, we can get out of here. There really is no fast car because no one can afford it, and if they could, the bank probably repossessed it, so they're coming for the banks. You know, a fairly ingenious idea to get back at the banks and hopefully get away with it. If Jeff Bridges' detective actually lets them get away with it, even if it looks like society doesn't care anymore if he defends the bank, he's trying to uphold order, as all of order is falling apart, and as this crime very much shows, there's really no meaning in any of that anymore. Two brothers, a divorced father, and an ex-con who have decided to rob several branches of the same bank in West Texas after their family's farm is facing foreclosure, and they just steal certain amounts of money, going to various banks in the morning because there won't be many people in them and they're easier to hit, and they save up their money and take it to Indian casinos, as they call them, or just really casinos, and take the money there and have it made into checks and try to steal money from the bank and use that money to buy back their land from foreclosure. But unfortunately, Jeff Bridges and his partner, played by Gil Birmingham, are very much on the case and trying to catch them, as Jeff Bridges can tell this plan is a little more sophisticated and there's something behind it, and is trying to figure it out as the two brothers keep robbing banks so they can eventually buy this land, and then Chris Pine, the divorced father, can give that land to his sons and set them up on a better economic path than he and his whole family has ever been on. This was written by Taylor Sheridan, who also wrote Sicario, and I think much like Sicario, it takes a very extreme position on a lot of things. I think a lot of people said that about Sicario as well, but he also does it in a very morally gray area, so it feels very real, it feels very realistic, it feels very relatable and modest and low-key and all those things, but he's also using various genre norms and things that we're used to in kind of very artful kind of ways, but also he's like pushing these things that we already know to their nth degree. In Sicario, certainly not all of Mexico is like that, and not every small town is this necessarily depressed, but what he does with that mood and with that setting is quite interesting. And there has been plenty of towns that I used to drive through on the way to vacations and things since the economic collapse. And you realize like this town that had mainly car dealerships and things like that are totally shut down because of the economic collapse, and several of them have not recovered. Some have. And this film doesn't really give you an exact time, you just know it is post 2008. I kept thinking it probably was 2009 because that was the era when that sort of thing was happening a lot, maybe like 2010, but in the end it doesn't really matter. Although this was on the blacklist, the script list in 2012, so around then it felt a little more timely, although it still feels timely because I don't think anyone's doing that much better. Hell or High Water captures this kind of small town America-ness in it that kind of reminds you, at least from how they use the setting of things like Fargo and the Coen brothers, but also gets the kind of mood of the town. There's a particularly great scene with Katie Mixon where she got a ridiculous tip from the bank robbers, and the detective played by Jeff Bridges wants to take that in as evidence, and she needs that money. She's like, this is my mortgage, I have a kid. And when Jeff Bridges is going around the restaurant trying to ask for clues, it's almost like people are doing it, but they don't really give a shit. They're respecting his authority, but they kind of don't care, and that seems to be going all throughout it. It does feel like an old Western where everyone has a certain cynical belief, like the whole town has a certain cynical belief. And in Hell or High Water, that's just all of West Texas. And this was directed by David Mackenzie, who is actually Scottish, and he does shoot the American West, I think, in a different way where he's not trying to capture kind of specific things. He does it in more of a using the setting way. You see all these got debt signs, you know, free money signs, take loans out kind of signs all throughout it, as a way to kind of show like how kind of bad it really is, that these are the things that they're selling. They're not selling hot dogs in movies and things like that. They're selling debt relief. That's the big selling point to everyone right now in this movie, and that's depressing. And I think it's a depressing setting, but almost sets it up in such a way that you understand what's going on. And there are certain films where you really feel for bank robbers, like Bonnie and Clyde, I think is probably the best example, or Gun Crazy. This film reminds me a lot of Gun Crazy in that it kind of feels like a smaller B movie that you just happened on and you're like, oh my god, I saw this really cool movie. It feels like a B movie that got away with saying a lot because no one was noticing. They just wanted the guns and the violence, and they're like, well, as long as we have that, we should be fine. It's really kind of interesting what it says. I think it says a lot about our modern era of America and what exactly are we doing, and it kind of makes like we don't really know, and it feels like we're not headed in the right direction. I like the desperation and the depressing and existential nature of this whole thing. Taylor Sheridan's certainly becoming a very interesting screenwriter, and I know he's working on his directorial debut, but David Mackenzie uses it in a much different way. He doesn't manage to have the same use of camera the way that with Sicario and Roger Deakins, and that's certainly unfair to compare the cinematography of this with Sicario, but I think what made Sicario probably a better picture overall is because the cinematography was so gorgeous and added extra layers to every shot and extra meaning to every shot, and I don't really see that in Hell or High Water. I see more just kind of modest or kind of just workman-like kind of cinematography, good workman-like cinematography. This isn't a badly shot film, but it's just not an exceptionally shot, and it doesn't remind me of kind of the better crime movies that really do something with their cinematography. I don't think it's really trying to say much. You might say like conceptually being modest works within its own plot line, but that might be reaching there. But I love how well it uses character. It uses minor characters so well. It uses like waitresses in the film. There's another waitress in the movie that steals scenes quite well, and I think this is a very well acted crime drama. Just silences. There's not a lot of dialogue, but when there is dialogue, kind of very natural. Like there's one line, I think Ben Foster says, "Only assholes drink Mr. Pibb." I don't know why I like that, but it kind of like has that very like uniquely human, regular person kind of logic to it that works so well. Almost the kind of dialogue you don't think about being written. It feels almost a little too real. Jeff Bridges in this film, he's kind of playing, you know, Rooster from True Grit. You've definitely seen him do this kind of character before, but he's so good at it. Even Jeff Bridges kind of on autopilot is incredible in itself. If Elie Kazan said, I think most actors only have 3 or 4 roles in them, or 2 or 3 roles. Well, anyway, they don't have that many different roles in them. I at least like how he used that role within it. It felt like he understood why he was using that kind of Texas lawman within this, and it worked very well for it. I think he definitely plays the older statesman well, and kind of this only guy who cares about the law, as everyone else doesn't have enough money to care about that anymore. Ben Foster is of course really good as kind of the wild card ex-con. He's very good. I like Ben Foster a lot when he has more fun to do, not like in Warcraft or something. Just seeing how he can charm women, how he can be a crazy ex-con, how he can do in a gunfight and everything like that. This film also has like some meta commentaries in it on money, on the open carry laws. It really tackles a lot of different issues throughout it. It's very interesting. Chris Pine, this is probably one of his better actor roles. His role especially feels like a movie star taking on a more modest film in the 70s and having kind of the movie star beaten out of him by this economic depression. It feels like he was once optimistic and now he's not optimistic at all. It feels like him and his brother almost feel like that they are kind of the cipher generation, so another generation after them can be a lot more successful. So welcome to the life of a millennial, I guess. Chris Pine plays that downtroddenness quite well. He plays it in such a way that you definitely feel like he knows this is the only option, and he's not exactly comfortable with it, but he knows that's the option he has to take. And that plays on his face quite a lot, but he's not as charismatic. He really downplays it, and it shows him more as an actor than I think I've seen him in any other film before, although I felt he was an actor in the Star Trek films, but he gave a little more range in this. The one actor who isn't even on the poster but really should be is Gil Birmingham, who plays Jeff Bridges' partner. Throughout this film, he's very funny actually, and the charisma between Gil Birmingham and Jeff Bridges is really good. I actually would like to see Gil Birmingham a lot more things. He has a great monologue where he talks about how the white people took the Indians' land away and now the banks are taking the white people's land away, and how the Native Americans are now sitting back and watching the people who took their land have their own land taken away yet again. I like this film a lot, and I like kind of very good crime dramas. A crime drama that has something to say is an interesting thing, but it also plays like a Western, which Sicario did as well. It plays in this kind of interesting way about itself. It has a score by Nick Cave and Warren Ellis, by the way, and it has this kind of very 70s way about itself, very kind of defeated and not sure where they're going, very existential, bummer kind of ending. We've had all these big blockbusters with explosions and things like that, and all this has guns and a few explosions. It feels like kind of the antidote to this time of year. You're not really expecting a film like this, and having a more modest film, it does feel like such a refreshing change of pace. It's a really nice little gem of a film. If you see it on demand or on Netflix, you will kind of be surprised by how taken aback you are from it, because this is the kind of slow, arty filmmaking that I think shows a lot of intelligence and is for actual movie people. It's not a really showy movie. It has a lot going on with it. It has a lot under the surface, and it kind of demands you pay attention to it and listen to what's going on, even though you're probably going to ignore what's going on and not think of it, much like these small towns are ignored themselves. Don't let that happen to you, because Hell or High Water is kind of one of the great gems of the summer and one of the great surprises of the summer. I like when I suddenly hear about a great movie that's in theaters and I'm like, oh, I should absolutely go see this. I think Hell or High Water reflects a certain era of America. It reflects a certain small townness, and it uses all that to make a really effective crime drama that says something about our post-economic depression times and how maybe those times aren't as over as we kind of hoped and wished they were, and maybe acted like they were, but they're still here, and you probably agree that they should rob the bank and take that money back and hopefully win their land and do these things out of desperation, and understand all of that because you're trapped within the small town of this economic collapse, and maybe there's no way out of it. But while you're waiting for no way out of it and you're waiting for the sweet release of death, you can at least enjoy this very interesting, very deep, very slow burn, modest crime thriller that can often surprise you with everything it's doing. So if you have seen Hell or High Water and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.